on the fire, so we should take another question. I'm Congilio, I'm a true fire educator, and welcome to the Fireside Chat. Let's get my lovely assistant Douglas to no, we want to ask a question. Douglas, enter the screen and ask another question, shall you?
Certainly. Would you like the fire turned down a little bit?
I think perhaps you could turn it down a little bit if you wouldn't mind.
Because it is, after all, a little loud.
Fantastic. That's so much better. Thank you.
Now we can hear this wonderful question much better from Mark Weaver from Minnetonka, Minnesota.
Oh, it's cold there today.
Yeah, it certainly is. What tips do you have for keeping a melody flowing while changing scales to match chord changes? In other words, how can we make our phrases overlap changes instead of being framed by them?
Wow. I would think you have written a question as such. Well said.
Very well said.
Again, this is a serious answer to a very serious question. What we want to do is try to make our licks and our phrases connect over these changes and sound like they are flowing through the changes. So here's it's kind of a silly answer is make sure you really know what you're playing over top of. For many years, I would just kind of go for broke when the solo came up and just play whatever. As I got to be a more mature player, I would kind of analyze the chord changes if they were something other than maybe a 12-bar blues or whatever. But even once I did analyze a 12-bar blues, I would start to see how the notes would fit over top of the chords, and it's from a simple pentatonic scale to 3 7th chords. For instance, if we're in the key of A and we're playing an A7, we have all these great notes, the A, and then the C is this flat third note, which is kind of weird against an A7 chord. I remember hearing some of my favorite guitar players talk about why that just works when the A7 clearly has a C sharp note in it. It just works, that's all you need to know. Then we go on through the scale, and it's D, E, G, and A7. Now that D isn't in our A chord, but it's a nice note that moves from, it passes to that E note, which is the 5, the 5th note of our A7 chord. As we move up the scale, that G note is our flat 7 that gives us that bluesy sort of sound that we love so much. The great thing about the pentatonic is it keeps repeating and repeating and repeating all the time. So those notes are always cycling through the chord changes. And what happens is in a blues, for instance, is once that chord changes, some of those notes overlap or they move in sort of the right way. And it's just this great puzzle that gets built when you're playing blues solos over top of blues chord progressions. If you're playing something that's a little bit more of a pop song or a country song or a rock tune perhaps, really learn what's going on underneath what you're playing. That would be my first sort of advice as far as what to play over top of chord changes and not being framed by them. We're lucky with blues because the pentatonic works so well with most of the chords that we're playing in a particular tune. And then what you'll see in my next course, the Solo Factory, is how we're going to take some of those licks and explain why they work. Once you sort of get them under your fingers and get some cool licks happening, I'll actually talk about why they work. If you can start to give yourself that kind of ammunition, then you can really start to make sense of your fretboard a little bit more and make good choices when crafting a solo. Well, hopefully that answers your question. Again, these are more sort of left brain ideas. There's no right answer. If you play something that sounds good, that's the whole goal here. Play something that sounds good, that's appealing to you and your audience, and you'll have a well-crafted solo. I think we have one question left, and we're going to move on to that here shortly. So stick around.